So in this video, we are going to be continuing to take a look at a scenario where civilization starts over. We are now on episode 39 of the series, and in the last episode, we focused heavily on decolonization, as well as continued rise of radicalism. We also saw a major civil war in a country, and much more. So if you do end up enjoying this video, please make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get straight into it. So the first thing I want to talk about is more stuff on the ideologies layer. We focused heavily on it last episode, and we are going to be continuing to do so in this one, as ideology, or more simply radicalism, is becoming very prevalent in the modern times, and it's actually going to be causing a lot of interesting things this episode. So first things first, we have a few more nations turning into communism. The first one, oh, and I just realised I forgot to give these guys a bubble. These guys are a democracy. But anyway, the countries that are turning communist, the first country to turn communist is the yellow team right over here. They experience a coup. So these guys, they will be turning into a communist country. We also have the orange team over here becoming communist. But it is not only just going to be countries turning communist because, there's some more radicals in their country. There is actually going to be a lot of interesting examples of this. But to talk about that, first we need to move over to Australia. So in the last episode, France gave away a very large portion of their Australian colony to this purple team, and there are a lot of people in France who aren't happy about that. Ever since France lost hold of their colony in Brazil, there have been many people in their country, which is kind of a culture in France, where the people, they do not have very popular views of giving up any land or giving up any colonies. The people see it as weakness of the government, and with Australia now starting to be giving independence, there are a lot of radicals that will actually be rising up in France, and these radicals will be promising to, restore the old glory of France, and they promise to the people that if they come into power, France will not lose a single inch of land. Now, while these radicals, they do have a pretty large chunk of support, there is one issue, and that is the fact that the monarchy of France is quite strong, and they only gave up a little bit of land, so this kind of just stays as an idea with some radicals. However, then the French make an absolutely massive mistake, and that is actually going to be giving up New Zealand. Now, the thing with New Zealand, it was quite a strategically important area for France, especially with, connecting to their islands in the Pacific. And with them giving up this country, the radicals start to receive a lot more support. Now people are really starting to realise that the French are just going to give up these colonies, and there is a pretty major pro-communist uprising in France. We basically see in the 1925 elections of France, it's basically like two different groups of the government that are very evenly split. Now, I'm actually going to draw in like the regions where the communists won and where the other candidates won. So the communists won seats in Brittany and in a lot of this southern French area, as well as some of this kind of recently Dutch area, as well as Calais as well. We saw the Democratic Party that wanted to continue with the monarchy, these guys are the main party. They saw a lot of success with the northern regions where most of the population live, as well as the southern region. And then, pretty interestingly, we also saw a socialist region over here. Now, something very interesting about this election, while overall the continuation of the monarchy vote, it did win, the combined vote of the communists on top of the socialists would have actually been able to beat the monarchist French government. So, something happens that is actually pretty interesting. The socialists and the communists actually team up to form a coalition government, and this actually causes the communists to win the French election. Now, unfortunately for the communists, the monarchy and a lot of the people actually in France that also support kind of like a democracy instead of like the monarchy, but they still are in support of the monarchy, they really do not like this. They do not want to become a radical country, especially, because it's in the more populated areas where the people want the monarchy to continue. So the French government will actually make the decision to kick out the communists and the socialists as a political party from the elections. And that is probably the worst thing that they could possibly do. All throughout France, in the regions of the country where the communists won, we see a bunch of revolts break away as the French communist government, as well as the socialist government, officially declares their independence away from France. Now, this is absolutely terrible for France. Now, luckily for the communists, there are also a lot of French people in Australia that don't want to continue to give up land. So in Tasmania and kind of the southern Australian region, we also see these communist rebels break out over here. And after taking the coastal areas, they are basically able to take full control over Australia. They also take over all of these Pacific islands, and that's very bad for France. They do still have hold of their land over here in kind of this African area, southern Africa, as well as in Nigeria, but in their mainland, the French are kind of struggling. They get pushed out of this area down here, and this other bit is kind of squeezed in on. And the French are then going to have to fight for their main populated land. They kind of push back a little bit against Brittany, and then they kind of push back a little bit more in the northern areas. However, then something really bad happens. In Nigeria, we have a pro-communist force actually rising up. This is kind of like people that want independence, but at the same time, they are kind of just like their own separate faction. So they will be rising up right here, and they'll be quickly taking over the Nigerian colony. And down here in this southern African region, with the communist French basically taking control of the colonial parts of the empire, these guys are basically kind of just forced to come under the communist rule, even though they don't exactly support being communist. Back over in France, the French government manages to fully kick out the communists from Brittany. However, the communists do also have land up here, and I think it's important to note that the communist French are being heavily funded by outside powers. Take a good old guess at who you think that is going to be. But the French are heavily receiving support, and they actually receive so much support that they are able to kick out this southern region right over here. And after this, they begin to come back more into northern France. They also see a second uprising in Brittany, and with the French being heavily demoralised and outnumbered, they are quickly being squeezed in on. The French will attempt to implement conscription, however the communists will continue to see success, and in the end the communists are successful in defeating France. So let's go ahead and take a look at this peace treaty. So in this peace treaty here, France manages to maintain control of the Australian colony, which is something the communists wanted to do. The communists also being actually in support in this southern part of Australia make it so that there is pretty much no call for independence down here anymore, which is very good. The French, they don't lose any land because of this. The French are able to maintain all of their land, but of course the most notable thing, the French are now a communist nation, and this is huge for the communist nations of the world, because they now actually have a very strong colonial country within their bloc, and the European communists continue to grow stronger. Guess who else is becoming communist? Finland. And they also force their puppet state to become communist as well. Now, Finland, they are very interesting. They haven't done too much throughout the course of this series. They are a very neutral country. However, with radicalism really spreading, and also based on their situation, they were heavily hit by the Great Depression, and this, of course, influenced a lot of radicals, and this allowed the communists to take control. Now, one thing you may be noticing is that the communists are seeing a lot more success in terms of radicalism than the fascists, and that is because the prospect of a communist society is much more kind of hopeful for the people of these countries. When they are looking at a fascist society, they kind of see it as authoritarian, very similar to the dictatorships that a lot of these countries are breaking away from. But with communism, the communists promise to make everyone equal, which is something a lot of the people of the world are currently really wanting to see happen. And the final ideological change, I believe, in terms of communism that we will be seeing this episode, is actually going to be a pretty major one, and it's going to be over here in Turkey. In the Turkish elections of 1926, a communist party wins. The way they were able to do this was taking advantage of the fact that the King of Turkey had died 2 months prior to the election. This kind of caused a little bit of turmoil in the country, and they were able to take advantage of this. Basically, what they did was pretty smart. They went to the son of the King of Turkey, and the king's son was actually pretty leftist and rather communist as well. So what they did was they installed him as the dictator or the leader in a new communist country. So they still technically did keep the royal family, but that's an interesting way that they've been able to swing control of this country here. There are now 11 communist countries in the world, so this is an ideology that is definitely rapidly spreading. But now we need to go over to South America, because it is here where we're actually going to be seeing some very interesting events take place. So, the USB, we need to talk about the USB. The USB, they have been a very neutral country for quite a long time actually, and it's finally time where they are kind of stepping out of their neutrality phase, and they are starting to become a major player. Although, when I say major player, I don't mean throughout the world. The USB's influence isn't too big. If I were to show the USB's influence on a map, it would be, I'll draw it around with a white line. It would look something like this. Now, one thing you might notice is that this basically lines up with their economical alliance borders. But one thing you may have noticed, I also outlined this Ecuador country right over here, and that is for a very specific reason. If we are to take a look at the ideologies layer, and yes, I know I said we wouldn't be looking at the ideologies, but we're looking at it again now, we can see that this country right here is a dictatorship. Now, as a very democratic country, in fact, these guys are the most democratic country in the entire world. Ireland, they are also democratic, but they have a little bit more corruption. I mean, we did just see communists break out in Ireland. But they are currently the most democratic, the most people-friendly country in the entire world. And they have big visions for the future of South America. And one of those big visions is freeing the continent from absolutism. What they plan to do is introduce peaceful reforms into a lot of these countries and hopefully make South America a place better for all people. Two countries in which they have been successful in influencing is these two guys right over here. These two guys, while not being directly influenced by the USB, they are rather friendly with the USB. They are constitutional monarchies, so they have some democratic friendly ideals, and they heavily collaborate with the USB. However, there are some other countries in the continent which aren't so friendly towards their people. More specifically, like I was just talking about, a few of these dictatorships, and this dictatorship right over here, because we're actually going to be seeing something. After a few months of preparation, the green Ecuador country will be crossing the border into the brown team. Now, the green team has been directly ordered to do this by the USB. The USB, they are also in this, they are sending a lot of their forces in, so it's the USB and the green team working together on this. And the aim of the USB here is to topple the dictatorship government and establish a pro-people democratic government in Ecuador. This is a very noble cause, and there are a lot of people in the USB who are in support of this, and this is only the first step of their plan. The USB and the Green Team will quickly cross into this country. Their main focus is blitzing towards the capital. Another thing, the USB had crossed through the Panama Canal. Now, if we take a look, we can see that Central America is a dictatorship, so, but I imagine that the Panama Canal would be international waters, so they are still allowed to move through there. The reasoning for doing this is taking the Galapagos Islands. They do not want to take the mainland and then just have this government flee over to the Galapagos. They want to ensure that this country can be completely reformed. After this, the Brazilian Navy will also make a landing in the southern part of Ecuador and will be successfully capturing the capital along with the Green Team's forces who had just arrived, and with the country being split in two, it will be surrendering over to the USB. And taking a look at this peace treaty, we can actually see that the Green Team or the USB has taken absolutely no land. As I had just said, these are very pro-people and very uncorrupt countries, so they are actually very honest with their purpose. They were not doing this to imperialize or take land. They were purely doing this for the exact reason that they said they would be doing this, to free the people from a dictatorship. And this actually shows to a lot of the world that the USB is a pretty good country in terms of morals. And also the people of Ecuador Instead of seeing the USB as invaders, they see them as liberators. Now, if they did take land from Ecuador, they probably would have seen them as invaders, but they were smart enough to not do that, and also that wasn't their purpose anyway, like I just said. So the people of Ecuador are very much in support of the USB. Also, another thing, the USB is successfully able to fix up all the issues with the government in Colombia and turn these guys into a full democracy. Another thing regarding to democracies, this green team over here also becomes a full democracy, as a lot of these American countries are really trying to sort out all the issues they have, and while Eurasia is turning to radicalism, the Americas are turning to a more peaceful approach. But if you thought that that was the only mission that the USB was going to be doing, you would be sorely mistaken. Because 3 months after the invasion of Ecuador is finished, the USB will be launching a second mission, this time into the pink Peruvian country. The USB's forces, which are kind of moving through the two Ecuador countries, will be quickly crossing the border. They will be capturing this major city right here, and the reason for them doing this is the exact same reason as for Ecuador. These guys are an absolute monarchy, and their monarch is not a very friendly person. When the USB went over to these guys to attempt to implement some reforms like these two countries were doing, this guy literally slapped the leader of the USB in the face. The president of the USB was assaulted by this man. So the USB, they're really going in on this one. Their capital will quickly be captured and the country will be cut in two, and after that this nation will be surrendering over. And in the peace treaty, predictively, this country will be installed with a pro-democratic government. Taking a look at the alliance layer, another thing I want to talk about is that when these two countries had their democratic government installed, they were invited and accepted to join the South American Economical Alliance. So that is a pretty big win for the USB. Now this is a currency alliance. But now we need to move over to North America. Now, unfortunately for North America, there is really no big pro-democratic country. Now, I say that, although most of the continent is democratic, there really is no reason for them not to be, unlike South America, where it was kind of more fueled by, independence through nationalism from getting their independence. A lot of these countries up here were very freely granted independence. This is especially true for the countries of the English colony and the Indonesians, although, of course, there is going to be an outlier. Same with the Irish colonies, as these guys were very democratic, and even with the Swedish colony too, although we saw what happened with Sweden. But what I want to talk about here is the Pyrenean colony. Now, over the past few episodes, I have been mentioning the fact that the Pyreneans have been violently repressing all calls for independence within their colony. Now, so far, this has gone okay. However, a pretty big event just happened. The colony of the Pyreneans just hit a population of 60 million people. Now, this is absolutely crazy, considering the fact that mainland Pyrenees has a population of about 17 to 18 million people. So, these guys have really reached their capacity. Now, if this were in a slightly different situation, the Pyreneans might have been able to keep control of this colony. However, like I have been talking about over the past few episodes, there is the idea of radicalism. And let's just say, seeing the instability of this region, there are a few countries that are going to be influencing this colony to turn to their ideology. And these countries are of course going to be the communist nations. In the very northern part of the colony, this is kind of in northern Texas, sort of, but also spreads into a few other states, we see a very large communist rebellion break out. Now, these guys are able to do this quite easily, as this is in the very far reaches of the Pyrenean colony, and this causes the Pyreneans to go into panic mode. Like I have said before, the Pyreneans, they are very reliant on this colony. It is very important to them, and losing it would be an absolute nightmare. So the Pyreneans are going to be full sending all of their forces into this rebellion. Now, of course, this rebellion will have a bit of time before the Pyrenean forces do arrive. So before any troops do arrive, the Texan Rebellion, which is what I'm going to be calling these guys, they already managed to take over a very large portion of the northern colony. Not only that, we also see a rebellion down here in Louisiana. Now, this one is very concerning because this is actually a fascist revolt. Now, what are fascists doing in Louisiana? I'm not too sure. However, one thing to note, these guys, they are not being funded by an outside power. Once again, if we take a look at the ideologies layer, which has become very important, we can see that there are no, like, real, very strong fascist countries. We, of course, have this guy down here, but they don't have any coastal access. Same with this guy, and I guess Norway, but Norway is not strong enough to fund this. So these guys are going to be all on their own, so they're kind of not in a great position. And at the point where the mainland Pyrenean troops arrive, the rebellions will be looking something like this. The Louisianan rebellion will be pushed back first, pushed back all the way to their kind of core area down here. However, up here in Texas, we do see these guys manage to hold on a little bit better. Now, in the south, this is even more kind of outreaching area and very desolate area, so the Texans do manage to see a lot of success here. However, overall, the Pyreneans do start to see quite a bit of success. Until a massive communist rebellion takes place up here in this kind of Carolina slash kind of deep south area, and this one is very bad, as a lot of the areas that broke away here were including port cities where a lot of troop shipments were arriving. Now, luckily for Pyrenesia, they do manage to keep control of Florida. If I were to draw areas that were very loyal to Pyrenesia, it would be kind of this region. This is very loyal to Pyrenesia. These guys do not want to break away. But up here, it's a little bit different, and kind of being inspired by what the Texans are doing over here, we see this rebellion break out. Now, I'm going to be calling these guys Carolina. I think that name does make sense. But they will be meeting up with these three major cities right here, which are kind of being used as a like a border defense, I guess. Back down in Louisiana, the fascists do manage to take some more land on the coast. However, at this point, the communists are being heavily ramped up with funding. Also, with the airplane being invented, it was probably invented a few episodes ago, these guys can receive funding from planes flying over their country, so they don't have to have like direct coastal access, although I'm sure there are like secret shipments coming in from the coast here and being snuck through Pyrenesia. And that is probably the case, as the Texans heavily focus on this coastal area as they manage to cut off this bit, and now they can receive direct coastal reinforcements. Back over in Louisiana, the fascists do pretty decently, and they are actually going to be signing a non-aggression pact with the communists, which is pretty surprising considering the ideological differences. However, these guys do understand that they do need to work together. Now, another thing that I need to note, Pyrenesia is in an alliance. They are in the Iberian Defensive Pact. Now, this includes the Salmon country down here, but notably it also includes Galicia, and Galicia is going to start to heavily ramp up funding to Pyrenesia. However, like I have been mentioning previously, Galicia has been falling off recently. Their main colonies are in Africa now, so they aren't like too strong when it comes to foreign policy anymore. Now, they are still the second strongest country in the world, but that is mostly because a lot of the other countries are kind of struggling from the Great Depression. But when the Great Depression ends, I can assure you it will not be like that anymore. Anyway, back over to the war. It's kind of going really bad for Pyrenesia now. First of all, this teal country up here, they start an invasion into the Pyrenean colony. They kind of just want some land, and yeah, that's basically their whole motive there. And with the fascists taking even more control of this coastal area, and even now with Florida kind of being in support of some of these more radical areas, yeah, it's over for Pyrenesia. First of all, the teal team meets up with the Mississippi River, allowing Texas to fully take control of all of this land over here. And with that happening, as well as these guys moving into this more southern area, the Carolinian Rebellion will be taking control of Florida, and we can go ahead and take a look at this peace treaty, as this is very bad for Pyrenesia. They have kind of been kicked out of continental North America here. So, taking a look at this peace treaty here, we can see what I have just said, and that is that Polynesia has been kicked out of continental North America. We see 3 new countries getting their independence. Now, interestingly, this country over here, I'll now be calling it Florida. They did decide to move their capital area down to Florida, as this was kind of like the core area of the Polynesian colony. It might take a little bit of time to get this land assimilated into communism. However, they do believe that they will be able to do that. We see the big green Texan country get their independence. And we also see the Louisiana country get their independence as well. Taking a look at the ideologies layer, pretty self-explanatory here. Now the Polynesians, they do keep a hold of the Bahamas for now, but I don't know how long that will last, because I imagine these guys will maybe want to take it. But that is actually going to be it for this video. I really did hope you enjoy. I am setting up a lot of stuff for World War II, and I do have World War II fully planned out, and I think you guys will be liking it. So if you guys are excited for that, please make sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.